The sun shone brightly over Riverstone County, casting a warm glow on the quiet streets. It was a perfect Saturday morning, and Jalen Carter, a 16-year-old black teenager, was filled with a sense of purpose. For weeks, he had been saving every dollar he earned from his part-time job at a local coffee shop. His goal was simple but meaningful: to buy a special gift for his younger sister, Alia, whose birthday was just around the corner. Jalen had spent hours researching the perfect present, and he finally settled on a silver charm bracelet from Belmont Jewelers, a high-end store known for its exquisite designs. The bracelet was elegant yet understated, and Jalen knew it would be something Alia would treasure. With his hard-earned cash tucked safely in his pocket, he made his way to the store, his heart light with anticipation. As he walked, Jalen couldn't help but feel proud of himself. He had worked tirelessly to save the money, and the thought of seeing Alia's face light up when she opened her gift filled him with joy. He was determined to make this birthday unforgettable for her. The bell above the door chimed softly as Jalen stepped into Belmont Jewelers. The store was quiet, with only two elderly women behind the counter. One of them, Margaret Whitmore, looked up from her paperwork and eyed Jalen with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Jalen approached the display case, his eyes scanning the rows of jewelry until he spotted the bracelet he had come for. It was even more beautiful in person, with delicate charms that sparkled under the store's bright lights. He smiled to himself, imagining Alia's reaction. "Can I help you?" Margaret's voice was polite but tinged with an edge that made Jalen uneasy. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. By the way, what city are you watching us from? Write it in the comments, we're curious. "Yes, I'd like to see that silver charm bracelet, please," Jalen replied, pointing to the one he had chosen. Margaret hesitated for a moment before retrieving the bracelet and placing it on the counter. As Jalen examined it, he accidentally fumbled, and the bracelet slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the glass counter. Margaret's expression darkened. "Be careful with that," she snapped, her tone sharp. "I'm sorry," Jalen said quickly, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. He picked up the bracelet and handed it back to her. But Margaret's demeanor had shifted. She began asking pointed questions. "Where did you get the money for this? Do you even know how much it costs?" Jalen explained that he had earned the money working at a coffee shop, but Margaret's skepticism only grew. Her eyes narrowed as she scrutinized him, her distrust palpable. Jalen felt a knot form in his stomach as he realized he was being judged not for his actions, but for the color of his skin. The tension in the store was thick as Margaret continued to grill Jalen. Her questions became more accusatory, and her tone more hostile. "You expect me to believe a kid like you has this kind of money?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Jalen tried to remain calm, but his frustration was mounting. "I told you, I've been saving up for weeks. I just want to buy a gift for my sister." Margaret wasn't convinced. She leaned across the counter, her eyes narrowing. "I think you're lying. I think you're trying to steal from this store." Jalen's heart raced. "That's not true. I have the money right here." He pulled out the cash from his pocket and placed it on the counter, hoping it would be enough to prove his innocence. But Margaret wasn't swayed. She snatched the money and began counting it, her lips pressed into a thin line. When she finished, she looked up at Jalen with a cold expression. "This doesn't prove anything. You could have stolen this too." Before Jalen could respond, Margaret reached for the phone. "I'm calling the police," she declared. Jalen's stomach dropped. "Wait, please. I didn't do anything wrong." But Margaret had already dialed the number, her voice loud and accusatory as she spoke to the dispatcher. Jalen felt a wave of panic wash over him. He had never been in trouble with the law before, and the thought of being accused of something he didn't do was terrifying. Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived at the store. Sergeant Blake, a tall, stern-looking man, led the way, followed by Officer Doyle, who seemed younger and less sure of himself. Margaret wasted no time in explaining the situation, painting Jalen as a would-be thief. He was trying to steal this bracelet, she said, pointing to the item on the counter. And he had this money on him, probably stolen too. Jalen's protests fell on deaf ears. Sergeant Blake approached him, his hand resting on his belt near his handcuffs. "Is that true, son?" he asked, though his tone suggested he had already made up his mind. "No, sir," Jalen said, his voice trembling. "I was trying to buy the bracelet for my sister. I have the receipt from my job to prove where the money came from." But Sergeant Blake wasn't interested in explanations. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," he ordered. Jalen's heart pounded as he complied, his mind racing. He couldn't believe this was happening. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, and he felt a surge of helplessness. As he was led out of the store, Jalen caught a glimpse of Margaret's face. There was no remorse in her expression, only a smug satisfaction. He felt a mix of anger and despair as he realized how quickly his life had been turned upside down, all because of someone else's prejudice. In the back of the police car, Jalen sat in silence, his thoughts swirling. He thought of his sister, his mother, and the birthday gift that now seemed so far out of reach. He wondered how something so simple could have gone so wrong. And as the car pulled away from the curb, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. The police car had barely come to a stop at the station when Jalen's mother, Simone Carter, arrived. She had been on her way to meet Jalen when she received his frantic phone call. Simone, the chief of the Riverstone County Police Department, was a woman of authority and composure, but the sight of her son in handcuffs ignited a fire within her. She strode into the station, her presence commanding immediate attention. Officers who recognized her quickly straightened up, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Simone's eyes locked onto Jalen, who sat slumped in a chair, his face a mixture of fear and frustration. "What is going on here?" Simone demanded, her voice sharp and unwavering. Sergeant Blake, who had been filling out paperwork, looked up, his confidence faltering under Simone's piercing gaze. "Ma'am, we received a call about a possible theft at Belmont Jewelers. Your son was identified as the suspect." Simone's jaw tightened. "And did you bother to investigate the situation before cuffing him?" Blake hesitated, glancing at Officer Doyle, who shifted uncomfortably. The store employee was adamant, and we had to act on her statement. Simone turned to Jalen, her expression softening for a moment. "Jalen, tell me what happened." Jalen recounted the events, his voice steady but laced with emotion. He explained how Margaret had accused him of theft, how he had tried to prove his innocence, and how the officers had ignored his explanations. Simone listened intently, her anger growing with each word. When Jalen finished, she turned back to Blake. "You arrested my son based on the word of one person without verifying the facts. Where is the evidence?" Blake stammered, "We were just following procedure." "Procedure?" Simone interrupted, her voice rising. "Procedure requires you to conduct a proper investigation. Not to jump to conclusions based on bias." She turned to Doyle. "Get the surveillance footage from Belmont Jewelers. Now." Doyle nodded and hurried out of the room. Simone's presence had shifted the dynamics entirely, and the officers who had been so confident moments ago now looked uneasy. The surveillance footage arrived quickly, and Simone watched it with a critical eye. The video clearly showed Jalen entering the store, browsing the jewelry, and accidentally dropping the bracelet. There was no sign of theft or malicious intent. Margaret's accusations were unfounded, and the officer's actions were exposed as reckless and prejudiced. Simone turned to Blake, her voice cold and measured. "Do you see now how badly you mishandled this situation? My son was treated like a criminal for no reason." Blake looked down, his face red with embarrassment. I apologize, Chief Carter. We made a mistake." "A mistake?" Simone repeated. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a failure of judgment and a violation of protocol. You owe my son an apology, and you owe this department an explanation. She then turned her attention to Margaret, who had been called to the station. The woman looked visibly shaken, her earlier confidence replaced by nervousness. Ms. Whitmore, Simone began, her tone icy, your baseless accusations caused significant harm to my son. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Margaret stammered, I thought he was trying to steal. I was just trying to protect the store. You thought wrong, Simone said firmly. And your actions have consequences. I'll be ensuring that Belmont Jewelers is held accountable for this incident. Margaret paled, realizing the gravity of the situation. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Simone turned back to Jalen, who had been watching the exchange in silence. Let's go home, she said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. As they walked out of the station, Jalen felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. The weight of the day's events still pressed heavily on him, but having his mother by his side made it a little easier to bear. The car ride home was quiet, the hum of the engine filling the space between Jalen and his mother. Jalen stared out the window, his mind racing with thoughts of what had happened. He felt angry, frustrated, and deeply tired. How are you holding up? Simone asked, breaking the silence. Jalen sighed. I don't know, Mom. I can't believe this happened. All I wanted was to buy a gift for Alia. Simone reached over and squeezed his hand. I know, sweetheart. And I'm so sorry you had to go through that. What happened today was wrong, and it's not something you should ever have to experience. Jalen looked at her, his eyes filled with emotion. Why did she do that? Why did she assume I was stealing? Simone's expression softened, but there was a sadness in her eyes. Because of prejudice, Jalen. Some people see the color of your skin and make assumptions based on stereotypes. It's not fair, and it's not right, but it's something we have to fight against every day. Jalen nodded, his frustration giving way to a sense of determination. I don't want this to happen to anyone else. What can we do? Simone smiled, proud of her son's resilience. We're going to take action. I'm going to issue a press release about what happened today, and I'll ensure that Belmont Jewelers and the officers involved are held accountable. This isn't just about you, it's about making sure no one else has to go through this. Jalen felt a glimmer of hope. Do you think it'll make a difference? It will, Simone said firmly. Change doesn't happen overnight, but every step we take matters. And I'll be right there with you, fighting for what's right. As they pulled into the driveway, Jalen felt a sense of resolve. The day had been one of the hardest of his life, but it had also shown him the importance of standing up against injustice. With his mother's support, he knew he could face whatever challenges lay ahead. For now, though, he was just grateful to be home. In the days that followed, the incident at Belmont Jewelers became a focal point of public attention. Simone's press release detailing the events sparked outrage across the community. People were appalled by the blatant racial profiling and the mishandling of the situation by both the store and the police. Social media buzzed with discussions, and local news outlets picked up the story, amplifying the call for accountability. Belmont Jewelers faced significant backlash. Customers boycotted the store, and negative reviews flooded their website. The company's management issued a public apology, but it did little to quell the anger. Margaret Whitmore was placed on indefinite leave, and rumors circulated that she would likely be terminated. The store also announced plans to implement mandatory bias training for all employees, though many saw this as too little, too late. Within the police department, an internal investigation was launched. Sergeant Blake's actions were scrutinized, and he was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. Officer Doyle, who had shown hesitation during the incident, was commended for his willingness to cooperate with the investigation. The department also announced reforms, including updated protocols for handling similar situations and increased training on implicit bias. For Jalen, the developments were bittersweet. While he was relieved that justice was being served, he couldn't shake the lingering sense of injustice. The incident had left a mark on him, a reminder of how quickly things could go wrong simply because of the color of his skin. Despite the turmoil, there was one bright spot in the aftermath of the incident: Alia's birthday. Jalen had been determined to give his sister the bracelet, no matter what. With the help of his mother, he returned to Belmont Jewelers, this time with Simone by his side, and purchased the silver charm bracelet he had originally chosen. On the morning of Alia's birthday, Jalen presented her with the gift. Her eyes lit up as she opened the box, and she immediately clasped the bracelet around her wrist. "It's perfect, Jalen," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him. "Thank you so much." Jalen smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. Despite everything he had been through, seeing his sister's joy made it all worth it. Later that day, as the family gathered for a small celebration, Alia showed off her new bracelet to their mother. Simone admired it, her eyes glistening with pride. "You did a good thing, Jalen," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Not just with the gift, but with how you've handled everything. I'm proud of you." Jalen nodded, feeling a swell of emotion. The support of his family meant everything to him, and it gave him the strength to keep moving forward. For Jalen, the incident at Belmont Jewelers had been a turning point, a painful but necessary reminder of the work that still needed to be done. And as he looked to the future, he felt a glimmer of hope. Change was possible, and he was determined to be part of it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video to show your support.